And we should talk a bit about, going back to, Trump's pressure campaign on Greenland. One of the pinch points that he zeroed in on this week was the UK's surrender of the Chagos Islands. He seems to believe that we were actually getting money out of this deal, which is extraordinary. He asked, is the UK broke or something? Because even he, realizing what a terrible deal it is to give away a piece of territory to Mauritius, to an ally of China, an ally of Iran. I'm not sure that Trump particularly cares about self-determination, but we should say that this is over the heads of the Chagosian people themselves. He thought we must have been given some money for this in exchange. In fact, we are paying for the pleasure of giving the territory away, which is extraordinary.
No, and in his own way has kind of forced that back onto the agenda. And because this deal, as everyone knows, doesn't make any sense from whatever angle you look at it from. If you're concerned about sort of decolonization and the plight of the Chagosians, and you should listen to the Chagosians themselves, who do not want to be under the thumb of Mauritius, Chagosians who have migrated over to Mauritius in the wake of when the territory became what it is in the 1960s, have been subject to discrimination. And also just historically, everyone knows that the fact that it was even kind of lumped together with Mauritius was a kind of quirk of colonialism. It was a kind of part of the same sort of administrative block. It wasn't something, even by the admittance of the Mauritian political class themselves, it was a place that they never went to, that they didn't really know very much about, and they're never really considered to be theirs. It was only later on in the 1980s, with a change of the ruling party there, that suddenly this became an act of blackmail and theft on the part of the British, which was suddenly much more railed against. Again, if you're thinking about the question of security, moving from a situation in which you do have sovereign ownership over that military base on Diego Garcia to just sort of leasing it off of Mauritius for a period of time, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And the only really firm conclusion you can come down to is that both this Labour government and its Tory predecessors, who kind of started opening this question when they were still in power, was the point about international law. That there were these, as it turns out, non-binding rulings, which led them to believe that they had no choice, or that they had to kind of negotiate something now so that they didn't end up losing it on worse terms later. It doesn't even necessarily stack up according to the international law experts, who would say that this is no justification for it. So particularly with Keir Starmer and Lord Hermer in place at the moment, I think it's sort of reminded that in the same way that sort of NATO ended up kind of infantilizing large parts of Western Europe militarily, like they felt that they didn't have to pay for or take responsibility over their own defence, because in their minds not only was there the post-Cold War peace dividend, but America would ultimately ride to the rescue. Not only has that been called into question, but also the way in which the political class in general, but this Labour Party in particular, their deference to international law is a way of avoiding trying to even think about broader geostrategic questions and interests. You just defer to the ruling of the international court, and therefore no more needs to be said about it. And yet it shouldn't take someone as a sort of singular and so generous as Trump to come along and say, but why are you doing this? I think anyone who's looked at that question for longer than 5 seconds is tempted to ask that question of them as well.
Jacob, I mean, it is. It just feels as if, the international law has become a kind of excuse to kind of hide behind. And what's really struck me is the amount of political capital that Starmer seems to be prepared to burn on this. Not only looking stupid in front of the British public, who can't make neither head nor tail of it, but they really did a lot of work to sell this deal to the Americans, and initially the Americans did seem to go along with it. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, commended it as a fantastic achievement. Trump, via Rubio, supposedly said it was a great deal before having this realization during this kind of pressure campaign against the UK over Greenland. Why are they so invested in what is something that is obviously so nonsensical?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think the explanation for that lies in the fact that it's so of a piece of everything that is known about the very small and shaky thing that is Keir Starmer's character, which is that he is by kind of instinct in every regard the international lawyer and defers to this kind of way of operating international politics. And so for him, it's just like logical that there's been a judgment in the international law. We're going to have to really get on board with this. And it does allow them to play. It allows the kind of British elite to maybe rehabilitate themselves slightly, playing the role of like divesting of colonial possessions on the world stage, which in the kind of mirror image of the old colonial a role that British elites used to play. But what's really interesting about this for me is, I mean, in one way, it also illustrates the difficulty that the West has with America, because you've got America kind of with this schizophrenic attitude to so many international questions. One minute they're supportive of the deal, they've been lobbied by the Starmer government, but in any case, I mean, it follows a long-standing historical American policy of encouraging former colonial powers to divest of their colonial possessions. Has been a track record policy of the United States for a long, long time. And then suddenly, almost because it seemed to be the only good argument in favor of securing Greenland, somebody happened upon this, probably saw it on social media, and it honestly was I mean, it seemed like a pretty actually good comparison to make with regard to Greenland, that one day maybe the Danish would just decide to get rid of it in the same way the British did Chagos. And so it became an issue, almost to fill the void that was there from any absence of any decent articulation in the public sphere, at least, of why Greenland was so important. And this schizophrenic attitude of the American kind of leadership on the world stage is partly what's driving a lot of this sense of instability, and it's what contributes to this sense of kind of growing danger and risk, especially among European leaders who are just casting around thinking, well, if America is so unmoored in terms of its strategic objectives, despite what it publishes and puts out, then anyone could be next for almost anything at any time.
Tom, do you want to add anything on this?
I think what has become clear, particularly as it relates to Europe, is the two things which seem to be certainly contributing to the instability or the uncertain responses from various European political leaders is like a combination of weakness and lack of seriousness, which has developed over the course of many decades now. So the weakness is relatively straightforward to assess, both in terms of allowing military capacity to wither on the vine, but also the economies which would otherwise sustain a country, as well as allow you the industrial base to produce your own defences.
Yeah.
Those two things crashed together has created a situation where even middle powers, which under any system are going to be having to kind of negotiate their way between larger powers and what their intentions are and what their leaders deem to be their national interests. You do that from a position of relative strength if you are much more capable of defending oneself, if you're presiding over a strong economy, if you're presiding over a country in which you have proper a stable civil society and democratic backing for your government, which is not obvious for many various Western European countries at the moment, where things are very, very teetering on the edge in respect of many of those things. And then there's just the question of the unseriousness. It's like they've never really had to confront any of these questions before, either because it was something that they up until the war in Ukraine, everyone acted as if conflict was a thing of the past, that it was just never going to happen again.
Or at least over there somewhere.
It would be over there. It would be a war of choice. War became basically a kind of foreign policy decision rather than something that would land on your doorstep. And they assumed that this would be the case forever. The sort of presentism of so many of our political leaders was really exposed over the course of the past 5 years. And again, the deference to and unhealthy level of belief in international law, globalist institutions to just keep things stable has been entirely called into question. So it's one of the things that they're now kind of thrashing around, having no idea what to do, is because they've partly by dint of the luxury of the past few decades, I suppose, but also because of the fact that they've vested so much of the decision making, so much of the authority in unelected, distant institutions and mechanisms, that they've never really had to probably get to grips with this. Now they've been kind of forced to, in the light of a quite cartoonish challenge from Trump in relation to Greenland and so on. But it just shows that so much of the instability is not necessarily just coming from without, it's also coming from within these societies, which don't have a clear sense of what their policy is, how they're going to pursue it, and what conditions they would need to create in their own societies, both economically, militarily, what have you, in order to navigate what is always going to be quite a dangerous world. So all of that has just been thrown up in the air by the past few years, certainly.